I'm Diana. I'm 50 years old. I was born in Toronto, Italian background, and I'm a holistic practitioner. And I'm here to tell you about my journey with psychedelics. When I was 18 and went off to college, very shortly after, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's, form of cancer, and much of it was found in the throat area. And this began my journey dealing with health issues and trying to excavate the cause. So it started with this diagnosis of cancer at age 18, and that was my very first, that was the beginning of me starting things like psychotherapy, because something that was coming clear was that as I got the cancer treated, there gave rise to this issue of how did I get myself into this situation, and how can I deal with the causal issues so that I'm not dealing with this again, or so that I don't recreate this kind of situation. So I entered into psychotherapy, and now being the age that I am, I have been in therapy for about 30 years, on and off. So that has been a very big part of my life from 18 onward. Some of the things that came up in therapy had to do with sexual abuse that happened as a child and not saying anything about it. So keeping secrets. Interestingly enough, the cancer was also found not only in the throat area, but in the groin area, mostly. So from that sort of holistic viewpoint, or from a psychotherapeutic point of view, certainly it was localized in areas that were related to the sexual abuse, it would seem. Because the issues surrounding sexual abuse kept coming up in my life, there would be periods of time where I could kind of go along, be in relationships and so forth, and function normally for all intents and purposes, but it would keep reemerging, the issues surrounding it. Things related to self-esteem, not feeling worthy, there was always sort of this issue around expression, inability to fully express, and yet there was a desire to express. I really loved, when I was younger, performance art. I wanted to write. I was very interested in poetry. I love art. So the expressive arts are really something that I really gravitate to, but I was on lockdown. There was no ability to really, in a satisfying way, express my own creativity. At age 50, where I am now, what I found myself dealing with was, again, a theme related to this throat issue. And in retrospect, I've had throat issues my whole life. So not only did the cancer show up there, but when I was young, for a number of years, maybe 10 even, I always had this lump in my throat. It was like, and I could never, it just felt full and swollen. I didn't know what that was about. And then it did seem like it kind of subsided, and definitely when I went into therapy, that seemed to reduce. But just recently, something that came up was something that was very alarming, and that was that I began to have a choking response. So, and I have been or was dealing with that for a good 3 or 4 years. No, maybe 3 years. So what started to happen was, with no real pattern that I could pinpoint, randomly I would just start to choke. It was when I was eating, and it was very alarming. I went to several doctors, and they did barium, like x-rays, and they couldn't find anything. And I did Gestalt therapy. I drew from my usual psychotherapy, so talk therapy. And though that created some like awareness of the issues, the choking remained. It didn't seem to, the body didn't follow suit. And the problem with that for me was that this was beginning to feel life-threatening. I live on my own. There have been incidences where I was choking in a public place and no one was able to help me. There was an instance when I was at home and it was happening, and I ran out onto the street and I almost got hit by a van because I was trying to wave someone down to help me. I was like, and he like swerved and missed me. I mean, I was in panic, and eventually I found myself where the only thing I could think of to do was to really talk to paramedics. I spoke to people who worked for 911 and said, here's the deal. I choke and I don't know when it's going to happen, and I don't live with someone who can do the Heimlich maneuver. What can I do? And they walked me through, if you think you're starting to choke, call 911. Even if you throw the phone on the floor, that's fine, as long as we realize it's from your home. And go to the front door, go outside and be outside. And if you pass out, it's better to pass out on your front lawn so we will see you and we don't have to break down your door. So this is like where I was at. What actually led to the intro to psychedelics actually had to do with the fact that my mother got leukemia. And I had seen a documentary on the use of psilocybin for people who were terminal, and how it seemed to be very useful for them to lessen the fear or anxiety around dying. And because my mother's diagnosis was, sort of in that realm, I was on alert to that, and her and I had talked about not only her own, thoughts or fears around dying, but even ours as our family. And then what happened was, a friend of mine who had had a very difficult year, she had lost her children, and she had also, her brother died tragically. She found herself at a sacred medicine ceremony. And that year had been very difficult for her, and I was there for her as a support. So I saw her through that. I saw how she was through that very difficult time. Lots of anxiety, very, very, very difficult year for her. She came over to visit, and she had done this sacred ceremony using psilocybin, and she told me about it. And that was where the shift happened, because not only was I able to palpate a vast difference in her, it was very noticeable that something had shifted for her. And then when she talked about it, it was her voice. It was what she was describing really arrested my attention. It really, there definitely was that thought of, wow, if this has done for her what it's done for her, and what it felt like it had done was it liberated her from issues and things that were really weighing heavy on her. I wondered if it could be useful for what I was dealing with. So it happened that there was going to be this other sacred ceremony happening. And I talked to my mom about it, and I said, you know, psilocybin has been used to help people who quell people's fear of dying. And the way it was sort of explained to me was that it allows you to kind of experience yourself as an eternal being and experience the oneness of everything. Well, certainly she was like, sign me up. And, you know, and even just hearing myself say that, you know, experience your eternal self and the oneness of everything that is, I was like, sign me up too. And we actually went as a family. So we were able to have that experience together, and we are, and psychedelics was never a part of our family, our language, our lexicon. It was really not foreign. Didn't have any thought about it one way or another. But here we were. Here's me choking. There's my mother with her leukemia diagnosis. And we found ourselves going, what do we have to lose? You know, what do we have to lose? And it happened that, and I'm going to say what so many, I understand that so many people have said this before me, and here I am saying it, is it wound up being the most profound experience I've ever had. And like I said, I'm a person who's done a lot of emotional work, a lot of spiritual work. Nothing came close to what that experience was like for me. So that was my first experience, and it was with psilocybin, and it was in a very beautiful environment. It was in nature. There were two shamans there who were very, that acted as you know, grounding sort of guardians, and they kind of just really set the stage for this to be a very sacred kind of experience, and it was. And had it not been for my friend who told me what it was like, and the documentary that I saw where it was professionally being administered to people who were terminal, there was this credibility that then was seeping in of, hey, wait a second, this is being used in a very particular way. And then understanding that, you know, older cultures and the shamans that came, for example, to do the sacred ceremony I attended, have been, you know, are part of a long lineage of, and come from cultures that have been doing this for a long time, and that there's a wisdom around it. There's an understanding about a way to approach it. All of that made me feel quite that like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I'm doing it in almost the best possible circumstance. In that sacred ceremony, the psilocybin had been put into cacao drink, and we drank it, just slowly and mindfully, while doing, honoring rituals and being aware of what it was that brought us there. So I was very focused on this idea of releasing whatever was standing in the way of this freedom of expression, or this dare I ask for this choking thing to have at least some insight. But what ended up happening was that through this psychedelic experience, I didn't just get insight into what the choking was about. There was an actual full-on healing, and the healing was very fast given that I had been dealing with it for 3 years, or that I had been dealing with a throat issue for almost a lifetime. The psilocybin experience was extremely opening, and I wish I could talk about it more intelligently. What's happened is my new normal took over. There's a new normal now, so I can barely even relate with who I was before. I think a lot of people would think it was not possible what happened. After the psilocybin experience, during that ceremony, it came to my awareness that there was someone who was able to offer that experience in a therapeutic environment. And the thought was that MDMA might be a really good way of approaching this, because some of the things that happened to me were terror-inducing, traumatic situations from childhood and through to some of adulthood. And that MDMA would create the possibility for sitting with, being with these things, looking at these things, moving into them, exploring them, but in a very safe, buffered way. My session with MDMA went on for about 3 or 4 hours. And because I did it with someone who I really trust and whose integrity is really, I felt, in place, their integrity was, that piece was dealt with. So I didn't have to feel like, oh, I'm in unsafe territory, or, so that, I think, was a key piece. And then their knowledge of the MDMA and how it worked really set my mind at ease. What the experience was like was feeling very safely encased in a bubble of love. And how I went into it, and that was also done in a very sort of mindful way, where what I brought to the table was anything that can be shown to me about this choking, anything that can be healed about this choking, any insights, any trauma that can be released from the body. So I went in holding that as my, what I was bringing to the table. And then what happened was that, I guess, the MDMA in its beauty mixed with my own consciousness, brought me to places, the exact moments in time that got me to where I was today, choking. So it brought me almost with a bird's eye view to the spot, the exact spot. So the moment when I was a child and the sexual abuse happened with a neighbor. And if anyone who's been sexually abused and as a child, visiting that kind of thing can be extremely traumatic. And working through it in psychotherapy, you're talking about it. So you're kind of, or at least I found, you're kind of reliving it, and you're drudging it up again. You're kind of having to think about it. By the time your session's over and you go back out onto the street, it's really there in your orbit again. You know, you're kind of like, oh, this thing happened to me. And, you know, the MDMA allowed me to drop into the event and to see it in a detached way, in the fullness of what it was. So it allowed me to see things that were happening in that moment that as a child I did not see or know or have access to. It brought me to a scene when I was 18, and my very first, it was a date rape, you know. And the thing about all of these instances was I was able to be with them in the way that almost like if you've ever seen the story of Scrooge, where these angels come and they show him something like, come on, I'm going to show you the past. I'm going to show you the present. I'm going to show you. The MDMA allowed me to go to these places and be fully there, and yet look at them through an observer's eye, but also a compassionate eye, and to see it more fully for what it was. And at the same time, release it. At the same time, get the lesson or the teaching. At the same time, be shown beauty. I would not have thought that that was possible, and I would not have thought that it would be possible to go to the place where this date rape occurred, for example, which is in a cornfield. So you can imagine it's very terrifying. To be able to go back there in your consciousness and just feel completely detached about it, and a compassion for everyone that's involved, including your perpetrator. What I want to say that happened in that session, and I'm only giving you 1/100th of what happened, was that right after, I could feel my throat opening. There was even this sense of wanting to, if I had necklaces on, I just wanted everything away, and I wanted this to be exposed. Usually I would wear chokers, I would wear, I felt like I felt it opening, as if rather than being in a contracted state, it was releasing and opening. Well, that's all well and good, but the real litmus test is, when the whole thing was over, what what was my life like when the whole thing was over? And I am ecstatic to report that going from choking at least 2 or 3 times a week for 3 years, it has never happened since then. And not only has it not happened, but there isn't even a hint of a choking response. So, where maybe I'm eating something and I go, oh, hang on a second, is it? No, it's just gone. This is a very, very powerful, not just healing tool. It's an access and an entry point into the fullness of who we are as human beings. I think that I'll just speak personally, once I was able to see the fullness of that, I can never go back to who I was, so the person I was before had a lot more hang-ups and was worried about a lot of all these little niggly things. A lot of that just popped like a soap bubble. And then my life became more about expressing yourself fully, living joyously in the world, giving your gifts, knowing your truth, speaking your truth. So now, very shortly after the MDMA, I went to an audition for a live radio play performance. And because I forgot to be afraid, I got the part, and I was able to use my voice in an expressive way, and to be able to speak now about this is part of that whole thing, being able to use my freed up voice for good and for what lifts me up and hopefully lifts other people up. After the psilocybin and the MDMA, what I found was that there was this continuation of things opening in my consciousness. So it was as if doors and windows were being opened in a myriad of places. I had no negative reactions or responses afterward, only positive and really vibrantly positive. I would say as much consciousness as someone can bring to it would be good. And that was something that the shamans had advised. I think it's very important that this kind of very powerful medicine be made available to the people who need it. I think it's vitally important that we fight to make it available, because all human beings, it can't be just me, want to be free to enjoy good health, free to be who they are, free to know the truth with a capital T. And so I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm very grateful for people who are doing this good work to spread the word, the good word.